Welcome to the playoff push for Week 31. Only 2 weeks left in the MLS season. With Simon Borg, I'm Jason Seguini. On today's show, a first for Philly, a second for LA, and 3 games left for DC United. But first, let's take a look at where the standings sit.
We start in the Western Conference, where it's LA Galaxy leading the way, followed by Seattle and Real Salt Lake holding on to that automatic third spot. In the ever-changing East, Philadelphia is now in first, followed by Sporting Kansas City and the Columbus Crew. We look at the wild card. It's still Western Conference occupying the first 2 spots. That's FC Dallas and Colorado. Bringing the rear, New York Red Bulls and Houston Dynamo hanging on to those final 2 spots.
Well, you mentioned them, Simon. Philadelphia Union are our movers this week. The Union got their first ever win on the West Coast against the Seattle Sounders. And Simon, this was a little bit of an upset.
It was an upset, but this is a Philadelphia team that seems to be peaking at the right moment and finding the right squad to win these kind of games. They now have the chance to take the #1 seed in the East. They have destiny in their hands. They're home to Toronto. Then it sets up a great final game of the regular season in New York against the Red Bulls. So Philly with a really good shot at taking #1 seed.
Philadelphia looking to win the East. Another Eastern team is our missed opportunity this week. Coming off a loss in the U.S. Open Cup final to Seattle, Chicago looked to bounce back with a home game against FC Dallas, and this was an FC Dallas team, Simon, that was struggling, hadn't scored in 4 games, but Chicago unable to get the result they needed.
And it really was a lifeless display by the Fire. They knew that a win in that game against Dallas would take them to 3 points away from the final wildcard spot. So they were very much still in this, but they don't show up for the game against Dallas. And to add insult to injury, they lose 3 players for their upcoming league game. They're all but mathematically eliminated.
All right, well, we are going to stick with this same game as we move to the final verdict. And the win for FC Dallas at Chicago means they are into the playoffs.
And Jason, this is why it's so important for Dallas to have clinched this early. They have a big Champions League match, their final group game next week. So this allows Schellas Hyndman to mix and match his lineup and rest guys ahead of the playoffs. He has said that the team was fatigued. September, October, they lost their way a little with so many games playing every 3 days. This is a big opportunity for them to really go into the playoffs ready.
We have another final verdict, and that is on the Supporters' Shield. Philadelphia's win at Seattle means LA clinched the Supporters' Shield for the 2nd season in a row, so congratulations to them as they basically repeat a feat that everyone in the league considers one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah, it's another trophy for LA, but not just that. They're automatically qualified now to the Champions League next year, and they have home field advantage in the West playoffs. And don't forget MLS Cup in the Galaxy's home at the Home Depot Center.
All things going well for the LA Galaxy cannot be said about the next team as we move on to staying alive. The team we're looking at here, DC United, 3 straight losses for them. Remember, we had been saying they have games in hand for a while now. Now they've played most of those games in hand. They still have 1, but with 3 straight losses, Simon, they don't control their own destiny anymore.
They don't. They're 5 points away, which at this point of the season seems like a long way. Yes, they have 3 home games to close out the season, but the tough part is that those 3 home games happen in 8 days, including the middle one in midweek against the Portland Timbers. What a tough matchup that's going to be, but you sense the air now coming out of the sails of DC United.
That takes us to games to watch for this weekend. Looking at the games to watch for this weekend, we have to point to the Portland Timbers taking on the Houston Dynamo. Simon, this is basically head-to-head for a playoff spot.
Portland at home, they don't want to miss this opportunity in their final home game. For Houston, though, this is also their final chance. They need at least a point from this because they know their end of the season, the last game, they have to face the LA Galaxy. So if Houston loses this game, they know the road's going to be tough to make it to the postseason.
The road's been tough when you had to go through Livestrong Sporting Park this season. That's what the New York Red Bulls have to do this weekend, taking on Kansas City, Simon, another big matchup in the Eastern Conference.
But they know that Kansas City play an open style of soccer, and the Red Bulls feel probably they can take advantage of those spaces. And they know a win in Kansas City would not only vault them in the eyes of many heading into the playoffs, but it would take them above Sporting in the East standings.
Another game we have to mention is the Rocky Mountain Cup, Friday night on ESPN2. And this one is huge for a bunch of reasons. Obviously, the rivalry is huge, but when you look at these teams, right now, third place overall in MLS is up for grabs. Real Salt Lake is holding it. And that position could end up with an automatic Champions League berth.
And Jason Kreis, manager of Real Salt Lake, has already come out and said it. He realizes what's at stake with that third best record in the league. He's let his players know it. Basically, LA or Seattle make it to the final. Number 3 in the league is in the Champions League.
One final game to mention before we go, DC United and the Chicago Fire, both teams desperate for a win. Nothing else will help them in that game, so it should be a fun game to watch. That's all we have for the playoff push this week. We'll be back next week, headed into the final week of the MLS regular season to get you ready for the playoffs.